welcome. Thank you so much for coming and chatting to me today. Today we had a bit of a chat on the phone, and there were some really good points that came up. We were talking about grief and loss, especially to do with the arts and entertainment industry. And from some of your background as a chaplain and a spiritual care director, I thought it would be really helpful for you to share some of those things.
Yeah, thank you. You know, loss is really interesting wherever it happens, and it's really no different in the arts and entertainment industry. And we have different types of loss. So a loss can be something very small but significant to us, and it can be career changing. And life is just a series of learning to let go and work through those losses. You know, I'd be interested to know some of the discussions that you've had with some people and maybe explore those a little bit with you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, so I had a situation where I was a chaplain at the Opera House, and one of those opera singers had a critical operation, and she was a leading star of this big production, and unfortunately she found out that she had a nodule on her throat, which was a huge shock, and she went in to have surgery on that, and unfortunately it was not successful. So for her, she meant that she lost her voice, and that also meant that she was no longer the principal singer. Wow. It really rocked her, as well as the people around her, and for her that was devastating.
Absolutely. And I can imagine the stages that she would have gone through. You know, when we're dealing with grief and loss, that there are 5 stages that we go through, and some people think we go through them sequentially, but we actually don't. You can go through all of these stages in one day. And the first stage is denial. So I'd imagine that what would have happened with that person would have been that she got that diagnosis. And the first thoughts that run through our mind is, oh no, that's not possible, they've got that wrong. You know, I'm going to get a second opinion, you know. And they go and get a second opinion, and they find out that the diagnosis is correct, you know. So working through that denial is actually the first stage. Beyond that, what happens is we move into anger. And with anger, it's like, well, why me? I've been working at this all my life. I've finally reached the point that I want to be in my career. I've got this lead role. This is really big. This is what I've always wanted to do. Why me, God? Why are you doing this? I'm really angry, you know? And we have to try and work through that. And when we realise that, yes, we are angry, but I can't change this, then I have to start looking at what the options are. And she would have started looking at things like, okay, am I going to have surgery? Am I going to have whatever the treatment was, you know? And what would have happened for her then was she would have moved into the bargaining stage. So we bargain with God. You know, it's God, get me through this. If you do this, I will, whatever it is that you think is going to convince God to do things your way. You know, so not your will, God, my will.
Or even a lack of faith, I could imagine, because some people don't have faith, so I could imagine that would also raise a lot of questions as well.
Absolutely. And that bargaining stage, if you had faith, maybe, you know what, I know I haven't been good, but from now on I'll go to church every Sunday or something like that. You know, if you're not a person of faith, it may be something like, oh, you know what, I should have helped out at the homeless shelter when someone asked me, or when that charity knocked on my door, I should have given them, you know, a bit more money or something. But we end up trying to bargain our way through that, you know. What's interesting is these stages were actually developed back in the 60s, and it was to do with people that were experiencing the grief of dying, okay? So the last stage, or second last stage, the stage that is after anger, is actually depression.
Wow.
You know, so for the person you were talking about, I'd imagine she's gone, okay, God, you haven't given me what I wanted. I'm running out of time. I need to have this surgery or whatever it was she needed to have done, you know. And we move into a depression stage where we're really thinking about things, we're really processing, we're really reflecting on our life,
Yes.
you know. And the final stage is acceptance, where she, and I don't know the outcome, I'd really like to hear it, but if that surgery, for example, wasn't successful and she had to have an entire career change, she would stay depressed for a while until she could accept what had happened and she could find meaning in her life again. And when she finds meaning, then she finds acceptance, you know. And finally, those tables turn. If you are a spiritual or religious person, where you go, it's your will, not my will, you know. And I now find meaning in this, so I accept that maybe I can't sing anymore, I can't act anymore, I can't do, you know, that fashion parade anymore, whatever it is that I'm doing, I can't do that anymore.
Yes.
But what else does my life hold for me? And that's how we move forward from this. Can you tell me what happened with that person?
Well, thankfully for this lady, she had it was a positive outcome because she was, even though she was able to lose her voice, well, it was traumatic in the sense that she was suicidal, but she had a community around her, so that really helped her to have a more of a positive outcome. However, it did affect the people around her, and that's something I find. It's not just that person that is affected by an incident like this. Often it's also the people, either if they've got family or the company that she was a part of. Everybody's impacted in their own way, and it was really interesting for me as well to actually see the way that everybody dealt with that so differently and so unique. And I think you also were saying something along those lines in our conversation about how everyone is so individual in the way they cope as well.
And you know what's interesting with that is the ripple effects of loss and grief and loss, the ripple effects that go out to all of these people. And it affects people differently. And different people will process things differently, which means that some people, for example, will process this by wanting to talk about it. Some people will process it by crying, you know. Some people will process this by thinking that they need to be strong for everybody else and holding their emotions back. You know, some people have been taught in life that they should never express those emotions because it shows weakness or vulnerability, you know. So people do process all of those things differently. And you know what? Whichever way you process it, it's okay. It's all good, you know. The main thing is that we do actually process it, because if what we do is we just sweep it under the rug and try and hide it there, it's going to come back later on. We need to process all of those things.
Really important. And what some of the ways that have you found that are helpful to help people process grief?
Talking about it is the main way.
Wow, yes.
And this is where chaplaincy is so important. You know, chaplaincy being the ministry of presence means that we get to sit there with people and we get to listen to their loss, we get to listen to their grief, we get to sit there with them if they don't want to say anything. We just know that we're there for them, and depending on your beliefs, certainly in our beliefs, we're bringing God right to them just by being there with them. So that's the most important thing. But remembering to work with people and accept them for how they process things, that's really key. So if somebody isn't crying and everybody else is, you know, it's okay to say, you know, it's okay to cry, but it's probably not okay to try and push them to do something they don't feel comfortable with.
Yes.
You know, it's whatever's comfortable for them. And our job is to create a safe space for them to open up, which means it could take several talks before they eventually want to shed a tear with us. And they trust us and they trust the world enough to do that, because they may have been taught their entire life never to show that. You know, so we have to work with how people are. And remember, people are okay however they are. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken. They don't need to be fixed. You know, we just need to be there with them to help them through this time.
That's brilliant. That's so helpful. I love that what you were saying, the ministry of presence, and it's such an honour and a privilege to be allowed into people's lives and come alongside them, and their stories are so personal and their memories are precious as well. So thank you so much for having this chat with us.
You're welcome.
And it's been really good to be able to talk about this really important subject that we come across. So
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Okay.